Welcome back to Raised by Giants. We are live. Welcome everyone in the chat, members and moderators out there. Good to see you guys. The first live show of the year. We're back at them, and I hope everyone was safe through the holidays and had a very happy new year. And we have an amazing show for you here today that I've really been looking forward to, a follow-up to the discussion with Jerry Marzinsky and Lynn Monet, which was an amazing discussion. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, please do. But today is going to be really exciting because we not only have Jerry Marzinsky, but we also have Patric Durk with us. So a warm welcome back to the show. Author with a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, 2 years in a PhD psychology program, retired licensed psychotherapist who worked for over 35 years with schizophrenia and psychiatric patients in state hospitals and state prisons and hospital emergency rooms. Jerry Marzinsky, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you, my friend.
Well, good to be here. I'm still trying to get organized here. But
Jerry scrambling.
Scrambling. All right. What I wanted to do was just do a brief introduction as to what's running our mental health system right now is big pharma and the psychiatric mafia. Okay. They're drug related. Everything is based around drugs, and they took over the Western mental health system or health system back in 1910, I believe it was, with Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefellers. Okay, they made a law stating that no medical school could graduate doctors if they didn't take a pharmacological curriculum. Okay, so that knocked out everything else that was going at the time: acupuncture, naturopathy, Tesla's violet ray treatment. Everything else was kind of thrown under the bus. Again, the deep state operating back there knocked out everybody else. Okay, so the doctors could not be graduated from medical schools unless they took the big pharma curriculum, which they controlled. So they control the universities right now. And, I've been in this field for 45 years. I've worked in every facet of the mental health system. I've worked on, last 10 years, I spent doing psych crisis in emergency rooms. I worked 18 years in the psychology department at state prison. I worked 7 years in the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet. And everything in between: mental health centers, private mental hospitals. And I've seen what goes on there. Okay, they're just drugging these people senseless. Nobody's being cured of anything. These drugs they're toxic. Just a few. One of the biggest things they prescribe are SSRIs for depression. Okay. Now, when I say they're toxic, these are the side effects of antidepressants, and they're selling, I think it's $4.7 billion of antidepressant drugs a year. The side effects are nausea, weight gain, trouble sleeping, dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, anxiety, headache, diarrhea or constipation, sexual problems, fatigue, tremors, increased swelling, lower alcohol tolerance, bleeding, lower sodium levels, vomiting, restlessness, muscle cramps, and seizures. Okay, the second biggest selling is anti-anxiety drugs. Toxic effects are nausea, diarrhea, constipation, loss of appetite, blurry vision, dizziness, drowsiness or fatigue, dry mouth, agitated, restlessness, headache, sexual dysfunction, sleep problems, increased blood pressure, stomach aches, sweating, lightheadedness, and tremors. Those are all toxic effects of these drugs. And what they're treating with depression and anxiety, these are energetic problems. Memory's energetic, feelings are energetic, thoughts are energetic. They're trying to treat energetic problems with chemical drugs. And let's look at how they're doing. The CDC reports 132 people in the U.S. kill themselves every day. Suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2021, 48,000 Americans killed themselves. Last year, it was almost 50,000. You look at the death rate in Vietnam, over 10 years of war, 50,000 soldiers died. Close to 50,000 people are killing themselves in the United States every year. Every year, year after year after year after year. And we've got more psychiatrists, we've got more psychologists, we got more psychiatric drugs than we have ever had in the whole history of the human race. And still, this is happening. You know, an estimated 24 veterans are killing themselves every day in the U.S. You know, from 2006 to 2016, the suicide rate increased 2% a year, with 1.4 million suicide attempts in 2017 and 47,000 deaths. Okay.
Yeah, it seems like they're trying to really solve a spiritual problem with worldly solutions, and those worldly solutions just don't work. And they've never
That's
worked.
True. That's exactly true. This is their report card. I would give them an F-. Nobody's getting better from these drugs. These antipsychotic drugs actually shrink the patient's brain with long-term use. They cause irreversible brain damage. Now, have I ever heard in 47 years, have I ever heard a psychiatrist tell that to a patient? Never. Matter of fact, I haven't ever heard them give, more than a fraction of the list of side effects that these antipsychotic drugs cause.
So working in the state hospitals and the state prisons, Jerry, what percentage of maybe in the hospitals that you've worked in of those patients actually leave?
Well, when I was working at the state hospital, it depends on which unit, and there were regressed psychiatric units where those patients would never leave. Central State Hospital, where I worked, had a graveyard of 30,000 patients. It's been around since before the Civil War. So what they're doing doesn't work. Now, a researcher would never be able to get into these institutions. A normal person who wanted to take a look around would never be able to get into these institutions. They would not let anybody into the state hospital unless they were family. In the prison, they would not let anybody in. And if they did let anybody in, they were surrounded by a whole host of administrators. That's kind of why I wanted to have Patric kind of give a bird's eye view of what it was like inside a state psychiatric hospital. The psychiatrists don't spend more than 10 or 15 minutes, maybe a month, talking to these people in state hospitals. Now, it's worse than that. Is they've got the entire population of the planet convinced that mental illness is due to a chemical imbalance in the brain. This is an absolute lie. They have no research to show that. Matter of fact, research has recently, well, not so recently, showed up that it's a lie. It was made up by Eli Lilly back when Prozac came out because they didn't have an explanation for how these drugs worked. So they just made one up. They go, well, okay, well, these drugs are somehow affecting the person, so it must be a biochemical imbalance. But one thing I saw when I first started work at the state hospital was that I never, ever saw any psychiatrist in all the years I worked there ever give a pretest for what the chemical balance of the brain was. So you figure if it's a chemical imbalance of the brain, they should have some baseline. They should have some test to tell you what's out of balance or by how much. They don't. It doesn't exist. So all they do is it was totally subjective. It was like, throwing a dart on a dartboard and starting with one drug. And then if that didn't work, it would be the next and the next and the next. So, based on their experience, they go, well, we should start with this drug. So they don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. Now,
I think they're starting to get away from the whole chemical imbalance narrative. They're starting to switch into something different in more recent years.
well, you would think so, but I saw an advertisement just a couple of days ago. What causes schizophrenia? Now, this came from the Cleveland Clinic. Okay, it says this is directly. This was 2023. It was. Okay, it says schizophrenia doesn't have a single confirmed cause. Experts suspect. Now, this is what they're using now. Experts suspect that factors that play a role are chemical imbalance in your brain. The chemicals involved in those that your brain uses to communicate with brain cells. Okay, so they're still pushing this chemical imbalance stuff. And one of the head psychiatrists, this guy was, I think he was a professor of medicine. He says, I don't believe I've ever heard a knowledgeable, well-trained psychiatrist make such a preposterous claim as that patients have a chemical imbalance in their brains, except perhaps to mock it. In truth, the chemical imbalance notion was always a kind of urban legend, never a theory seriously propounded by well-informed psychiatrists. This was said by Ronald W. Pies, doctor and professor of psychiatry at the State University in New York. Right. So it says the chemical imbalance theory was widely perpetuated following the introduction of the first SSRI antidepressant Prozac in 1988. All right. So that was done by Eli Lilly. Now, so that's duplistic. Right. The chemical imbalance is duplistic. The DSM, their Bible of mental illnesses, is also duplistic. It's completely made up. There is not a single test that will verify any of those diagnoses in that Bible. That's this big book of listed mental health disorders. Okay, so there is not a single objective test to validate any of those diagnoses. They make them up. Okay? Now, they started out with here it is. Says the DSM-5 contains nearly 300 impressive-looking but completely fabricated mental illnesses that were dreamed up by a small group of psychiatrists and presented in periodic meetings where 2/3 of their number had close ties to Big Pharma. Okay, so now we're talking about Big Pharma. The antidepressant drug market in the U.S. is expected to reach $15.98 billion by 2023. And these drugs don't cure anything. You stop taking them when you're still depressed. The anti-global psychotic sales are at $14.54 billion in 2021, and they're expected to reach $15.5 billion by 2022. So these people are in it for the money. You walk into a psychiatrist's office, you're not going to come out of there without a diagnosis and a prescription for some drug. You put 10 of them in the same. Go ahead.
No, you're completely right. You go into a psychiatrist for depression, you'll come out with 5-6 different prescriptions. You go in for anxiety, come out with 5-6 different prescriptions. But Jerry, we've talked several times on the show about alcohol and drugs are used as like a gateway for these voices to infiltrate into the mind and influence people. And I 100% believe that because I've seen it firsthand, drug psychosis. So we also have Patric Durk waiting in the wings here. He's been really patient. Would you like me to bring him on now? Or
yeah, bring him on now, because meth is one of the biggest lead-ins. It's one of the biggest gates that opens people to psychosis. I've seen it in the prison. The prison is full of people or prisoners who started using meth and went psychotic and then started doing criminal things. So, Patric can tell you about what's that like, what the voices were, what he did, how it took him over. Meth is very dangerous. It's like it opens up the person to these negative entities.
Yeah, so we have with us today Patric Durk, who has had an amazing story and journey, because I think it's really a journey, I feel, with alcohol and drugs and mental institutions and becoming sane in the midst. And he's also the author of the book Fire and Ice, the Meth Bible. Patric Durk, welcome to the show, my friend. It's good to see you.
Welcome. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for being a guest on your show today. I'm grateful to be alive and grateful to be free.
Yeah, this is really good to see you, my friend, and thanks for coming on with Jerry. How did you guys get in contact with each other? Well, I think that's a good place to start.
We met through film director Christy Lee. I shot a true crime documentary, and they had got to talking, and then she put us together, and we've worked together in the past. It's been great.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you, Patric, and thanks for coming on. So take us from the beginning of your journey. I don't think that you have any qualms with me calling it a journey, because I really think that it is, from the information that I've gathered about you. How did all of this really start with you?
I always start this story. I say I was born on January 31st, 1982. The devil tried to kill me that day, and I've been fighting for my damn life ever since. And I grew up in an alcoholic home. There was a dark mental illness present. I experienced childhood trauma, which I also think is a gateway. And then by 12, 13, I started experimenting with drugs like marijuana. And 14 years old, going into high school, I took my first drink, and instantly I was an alcoholic. From the very first sip, I detailed a story like that in the book, the Meth Bible, where I remember the first sip of alcohol, and I said, that's what I'm talking about. I want to feel like that for the rest of my life. And quickly, I was an everyday vodka drinker at 14, started having major consequences, star baseball player, just stopped playing sports, basically ruined my school career. And I dropped out of high school basically at 16 years old. I started working. And I had an addiction that went with alcohol mostly, but I did a lot of drugs in that time period too, up until about my mid-20s. And I'm firing through a lot of the story because I want to focus on the mental health aspect of this. But just to set the stage, I was a businessman at one point. I'm now married. I have children. I'm becoming very successful in the vacation rental business in South Texas. And I moved from Boston, Massachusetts down there with my dad back in 2004. And I started to have some type of success, and I'm married now, but I was a full-blown alcoholic. I had a string of bad business deals happen, and I boxed myself in. I lost my career, lost my family directly after that. And once I didn't have them in my life, I made a conscious decision. I just started dabbling with crystal meth. And when they were gone, I moved into my father's house in Corpus Christi, Texas. The name of the city quite literally means the body of Christ. That's where the story was set. The stage was set in this city. And I became a nighttime cab driver. I'm now a junkie cab driver, diving deep on a suicide mission, deep into the underworld of crystal methamphetamines. Crystal meth, and I think this is why the book is so powerful and so popular right now. Crystal meth is a portal to the darkest places in the spiritual realm. It opens your brain up to all sorts of evil entities. And on my other social media pages, thousands and hundreds of thousands of comments. It's a worldwide phenomenon. So what I was about to experience was directly a result of that. So I start living a life of crime. I'm in the taxi. It becomes a rolling felony. I'm doing things to support my drug habit because it was the perfect venue. So I'm dealing with pimps, prostitutes, drug dealers, check cashers, money printers. I'm living an absolute debaucherous life. I was an addict of all things in the flesh. And I started to have major evil experiences. I started to have vulgar displays of power. I detail that in the book. I won't get too far into that. but I started to experience the spiritual realm. And the turning point of where it all came to a big turn, was there's an accident photo, okay? And I was driving, I had been working way too much. I was driving my taxi, and I fell asleep at the wheel. It was a balmy October night, and I only had to make it one more exit up the road. And I found myself falling asleep. I woke up, I heard a loud crash. I found myself airborne at about 70 miles an hour, headed toward a big concrete sign the size of a redwood tree. And this is really when my spiritual awakening happened. I was sliding towards that big pole with that sign on top, the tires smoking, and I had 3 flashes where I saw it in slow motion, and I said, oh shit, that's concrete. And then I saw my daughter's face, and then right before impact, I thought I was gonna die. So I accepted my death. I was at peace. And then the white concussion. So the sign fell on my head. I watched the inside of the cab crush around me like a tuna can. That sign fell on top of the taxi. There was smoke everywhere. And long story short, I took this photo a week later. I actually checked myself out of the doctor before the x-rays even came back. And I had sawed all 5 ribs in half. My foot was crushed underneath the front seat. I was driving an old cop car turned taxi. So I took this picture, and this was the beginning of my spiritual awakening. Later on, if you take that photo and you zoom in to the top right, I had fallen asleep, and I'd crashed into the sign at the Christian Sleep Study Center. God had dropped a sign directly on my head to get me to take my foot off the gas. It's actually up to the right on the building.
I'm trying to get it over there.
Yeah. And you can see that. And that was a major sign for me. But I did not listen to the warnings of God. And I kept on going down the road to hell. And Ryder, I can tell you, it was covered in ice. About a year into this, I start going into psychosis a few months after this photo. I start experiencing all kinds of evil manifestations. I even start having contact with God. I was having big moments with God. I would feel the flame of God next to me sitting in my trap house. I was having major experiences with what I believe to be the Lord Jesus Christ. So
would you consider this experience, you crashing your car into this sign, a out-of-body experience or a near-death experience?
I would say I felt like there was something with me in the taxi. I detailed it where I felt something tug on my shirt. I look back in hindsight, and I believe personally that it was some type of angels or entities of light. And I was not in psychosis at that time. I was still hustling every day. I was deeply addicted to methamphetamines, but I was not crazy yet. And then a few months after this, I continued down the road, and I only got worse with my use. And I call it the Nebuchadnezzar effect. I remember in the book of Daniel, there was a story about a prideful king, and he was prophesied he was going to go crazy. Long story short, he goes crazy. He's eating grass like an ox in the fields. He loses his kingdom. God heals him. He comes out the other side. And whatever he experienced in between made him a believer in the one true living God. That's the story in the Bible anyway. So my story lines up with that very similarly. So I had that experience. Then I start going crazy. And I was now wearing a do-rag on my head. My house gets boarded up. I lost the girlfriend. I lost the taxi job, obviously, after that accident. It's a crazy story. But, you know, everything. They board the house up. It's 110 degrees in there. I'm living an absolutely hellish life. No running water, anything. And I'm walking 15 miles a day. I was a tortured soul. I was being tormented by dark entities. There's no doubt. The house was like a spiritual portal. I detailed it in the book. So I'm now insane, and I come to a breaking point. See, my father had spinal cancer at the time. I was a junkie, but I was also his caretaker. He disappeared. And the very last, I'd say like 2 months of my addiction to meth, he disappeared. There was a train of homeless drug addicts, all kinds of crazy insanity going on at the house. And eventually I had had enough. I walked home. A family member told me my dad passed away 3 weeks before. No one told me because I was so crazy. So I get to the house. I walk back to the house. I had self-inflicted wounds all over me. I was like the man from Gadarenes, the demon-possessed man. Hadn't drank water in 5 days, hadn't eaten in over a week. And I had my shirt off, some swim trunks on. The house is just demolished, drug paraphernalia everywhere, trash. And I passed out on the bed, and I woke up, and I looked over, and I saw a big blade, a kitchen knife, sitting on one of the old nightstands. And I remember looking at it, and I picked it up, and I verbally said, "This ends now." And I stormed out of the house. I threw a TV over my fence into my neighbor's yard, and I walked down to a fast food restaurant, and I poked my head into the door. The mental health system had failed me in the months leading up to this. I was being arrested for public intoxication almost every 3 days. I picked up a ton of those. They would bring me to the hospital, just your local mental unit at your regular hospital in Corpus. And then every 3 days, I was being turned out of the mill. I also sought drug treatment twice in the months leading up to this and was rejected both times. In the richest country on planet Earth, I couldn't get help when I really needed it the most. I was a danger to myself and society as a whole. I was legally insane from methamphetamine substance abuse. I was in deep methamphetamine psychosis, later on discovered.
How did sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. How did other people around you respond to your psychosis? Were they around you also using methamphetamine, or how were regular people that weren't on drugs responding to you being in the psychosis at the time?
Anyone outside the drug world was terrified of my lifestyle. The methamphetamine lifestyle is the most evil, debaucherous, sinful life that a person could live. It's the craziest lifestyle a person can live. It's just around the clock, sexual deviancy. I mean, anything you could imagine, it's out there. Absolute crime. People were terrified. But the drug addicts in my life, at the very end, once my dad disappeared, they swarmed in and they played into my delusions. And they acted like, I believed I was in a hidden camera movie at one point, being filmed by satellites. I thought I was going to be the biggest comedic actor on the planet. I thought I was selected for this movie like The Truman Show, only it was like a reboot, a reality TV version. And you could not tell me that I was not in this real life Hollywood movie being filmed right there in the city of Corpus. My dad, there's so many stories that I based in the book off of that. I was convinced I was living in an absolute alternate universe. It was very spiritual. It was very, very spiritual. I started having downloads of all different types. I mean, it really changed me as a person. I started to, I went into the McDonald's as a cry for help. I couldn't take anymore. I was absolutely broken in every way. I felt like I was going to die, and I needed to take my life back.
How did you break that delusion, or did it break itself?
Well, I'll get to that in the next part, the very next part. So what happened was, and this is the fascinating part about the story about psychosis and everything. So I went into McDonald's. I told them, this is not a robbery. Everybody get out of here. There was 4 employees. They ran out the back door. I threw the knife on the floor, walked around. I grabbed a burger. I poured me a Coke. I took one bite of it, and then the cops show up. I just sat down peacefully. And the guy came up the drive with a 12-gauge shotgun cocked. Someone had called in an active shooter. And he told me afterwards in the cop car, he said, I was going to unalive you. And that was a scary moment. I could feel him wanting to end my life. So I was on the floor. I surrendered peacefully. I went. I was facing some very extreme charges. Now, I'm in the state of Texas. It's the toughest state on crime in the nation. So that cry for help, because I took real property and because I had a weapon, I faced aggravated armed robbery, 5 to 99 years. I faced 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 2 to 20 years each. That's 156 years stacked. They ended up having me look at about a 15-year prison sentence. So I'm now in Nueces County Jail, one of the toughest county jails in the United States to do time in. I'm absolutely crazy.
We have a clip here really quickly that I want to show before we get into the next part of the story.
Yeah, go ahead and show that clip. I'm sorry.
Scary moments for customers inside of a local McDonald's. Police were called to a McDonald's on Saratoga near Weber just last night to the report of a shirtless man inside holding a knife and yelling at customers. And he also took food without paying. The man was arrested after officers were able to convince him to lay down his knife. And after the incident, luckily, no one was hurt. But that man has now been identified as 36-year-old Patric Durk. He's charged with robbery and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Police say that he tried to force his way into a nearby home earlier in the evening, and then he'd actually broken into another home where he stole a flat screen television.
No, you didn't really steal a flat screen television, right?
I gave them a flat screen TV. I threw it over. It was my TV. I threw over my neighbor's house. The reports were wrong because when the TV hit the house, I immediately ran around the corner and did that thing. They thought somebody was trying to break in. So that was a false news report. I was never charged with breaking into any homes. I've never done a home invasion in my life. So that was all just wrong reporting. The news was actually there minutes after the police showed up. I mean, within a minute. They were there almost simultaneously. So now I'm in Nueces County Jail. I'm facing a slew of very serious charges. I'm in deep methamphetamine psychosis. The funny thing is that when my connection to drugs was cut off, my psychosis actually got worse. I started believing there was cameras in my eyes and they were seeing what I could see. And if I read the Holy Bible, I would read something I needed to know because I'm having this major God experience. The movie it's God themed. It's, I detail that so you can look at that in the book. But I get worse and worse. They put me on the drugs that are available in county jail to stabilize people. And I'm put in solitary confinement. I was a victim of brutal violence in Nueces County Jail, extreme conditions. It was really a hard road. So I stayed that way for 8 months out of the 10 that I was in Nueces County Jail.
Were you hearing voices also, or was it just delusions?
It was delusions and feelings. And I mean, I was experiencing things that I perceived to be very, very real. And I experienced things that I believe were real today. And I was being changed from the inside out. And I mean, my life today proves that. Okay. So I'm there. Unbeknownst to me, I had gotten, after months and months in jail, when it was time to get an attorney, I had been placed with this guy who was the #2 pay attorney in the city of Corpus Christi, a very high-powered, high-priced attorney. And I got him as my public defender in a lottery. And I believe God placed this man in my life so this story could unfold. So we're going up. We're getting ready. My insanity defense is rejected by Nueces County's DA because drugs disqualify you. No matter how legally insane that you're acting, drugs, if it's in your story at all, they will disprove the insanity defense because you put the drugs in your body. You are now insane like if you were to do a drunk driving accident. You drank the alcohol, the accident's your fault. So they rejected that. I was getting ready to go to trial. And I'll never forget this. I remember my whole psychosis, by the way. I remember everything from it. I was just seeing through a different veil. So I remember everything that happened. I was just living in a delusional reality, but my memory was spot on. So I'm going to trial. I remember I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning. They only let me out for like an hour at night by myself. I was watching TV, talking to the weatherman, thinking we're having a conversation, 8 months into county jail. And I remember we're talking. And I went to bed and I woke up and I was completely healed overnight like I am now. I actually have a friend in real life who's still in prison right now. And I talked to him and he said, I'll never forget the day you walked into that gymnasium. He goes, you didn't even look like the same human being. I knew him from the streets. He knew me when I was also crazy. And he said that something dramatically changed and it was literally overnight. So I had this miracle healing and then it comes drowning me that I'm facing all this prison time. My house has been foreclosed on. I destroyed the house. All the terrible things I was doing to my body. I was using needles right off the floor and not even caring about who used them. I was having unprotected sex with so many partners I lost track. The lifestyle was absolutely terrifying to look back on once I had this healing. So 2 months later, we go to trial. I have a trial with just the judge, a bench trial the next morning. I called my attorney at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I've been seeing doctors the whole time. I was absolutely out of my mind. I mean, they were saying I was bipolar 1. I was misdiagnosed. So we go to trial. The night before, I call this attorney, and it's 4 in the afternoon, and I tell him, what are we looking at, man? Are we looking at probation? I'm like, this is my first felony arrest of all time. I'm like, I didn't take any money. I didn't hurt anybody. I should get probation for this. He goes, I'm sorry, Mr. Durkin, you're facing, he goes, they're asking like 15 years TDC. And I went back into my cell, and I screamed into my towel, I'm not going to be able to see my children when I'm in Huntsville. It's like a 7-hour drive from where we lived. I just accepted that the aggregation of every bad choice I had made from the time I was 13 years old till up until that point landed me in that jail cell. And I made a change, and I said, God, if you've got me going to prison, I'm going to go as a man of honor, integrity, and respect, and I'm going to try to serve you, and I'm going to try to save as many people from drugs, and I'm going to live a positive life as possible, and then I will pick it up after I get out. So I was looking at doing 12 and a half years minimum without parole because I had a weapon in the crime, and you have to do 85% in the state of Texas. And I walked through the leaky, dark tunnel with the swinging lights. There was 12 of us men shackled. I think that was very symbolic later on. And I had foot shackles and hand shackles. We're walking through this underground tunnel from Nueces County Jail into the courthouse, and you have to take an elevator back up. In the tunnel, I was walking by something I saw in the distance, and it was the same make, model, and color wheelchair that my dad had when he had spinal cancer in the middle of this hallway in the basement. And I didn't think I was going to beat the case or anything. I just thought I was going to be okay. It was a sign. I had a feeling I was going to be okay. I walked up in the courtroom, and my little high-powered attorney looked like Martin Scorsese. And he was wearing this charcoal gray suit, and he goes, get in the side room right now.
That's not good for your psychosis. You're thinking you're in a movie, and then the guy looks like Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, you'd have to see him. He looks just like him. There were so many strange happenings that kept me in psychosis. It's not even funny. And when the cops are feeding you gummy bears and pouring Pepsi down your throat in the back of a cop car after the SWAT team surrounded your house, that story's in the, based off of that story's in the book. I mean, all kinds of crazy experiences. So we go into this side room, and he's almost jumping for joy. He's like, we beat the case. We beat the case. And I said, what do you mean we beat the case? You told me 15 years last night at 4 in the afternoon. He says, I was at the DA's office last night on unrelated business. I had my briefcase with your files, your medical files in there because I was preparing for court at 8 a.m. Just so happened, when I say by chance, I mean by God, the DA caseload had switched that day. I now had a new district attorney. He presented my files to this district attorney in this last-minute meeting, and the guy just says, yeah, we'll push that through. An NGRI insanity defense. 1% of felons who apply for it even get it heard by the judge. 24% of the 1% who take that to trial get off. So less than a quarter of 1% of people can beat a trial on an insanity defense. And just to put that in perspective, Jeffrey Dahmer's insanity defense was rejected because he was too sane. That's how hard it is. And drugs disqualify you. I was in open court talking to doctors that I was on meth for 2.5 years, 3 years before the crime. I mean, it was an absolute miracle court case. The judge banged the gavel. He told me, don't say a word. Go up and stand before the judge. Judge Sander Watts banged the gavel. It was signed into law that I was found NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity. As part of my release, I had to go to a hospital. This is what the lawyer tells me after. He goes, you got to go up to the state hospital for 30 days. He's like, you're going to do a safety evaluation. He goes, you're not crazy anymore. He goes, you're going to go in there. They're going to kick you right out. They want nothing to do with you. I said, okay, I just did 10 months in the worst county jail in the country. I can for sure do a hospital. I was gravely mistaken. Now, this is where the story takes a really dark turn if it gets any worse, right?
Really quickly, before we keep going, Jerry, as a working in these state hospitals and these state prisons, have you ran into anybody else that their psychosis continues, their drug psychosis continues after the drugs have been taken out of the equation. Like Patrick, I believe he just mentioned that
that's
8 months after he had stopped the drugs, he was still in a psychosis.
Yep, see what's so tricky about it is when they start using, the prison was full of those kind of people that were psychotic years after they stopped using meth. Okay, so what happens is they take the meth, they feel like Superman, like they're flying. I mean, it's a wonderful feeling, I hear, and then they start hearing voices telling them things, and they go, well, that's just a hallucination. And then when they come down, it disappears. So they're convinced it's a hallucination. And that may go on for weeks or months later. And then one day they wake up and the voices are there permanently. They don't go away. Right? They're just as psychotic as anybody else in the state hospital. And it doesn't go away. I mean, they're gone. That's why I wanted, people to hear Patric's story. Meth is it's probably the single most dangerous drug out there. The prisoners called it the devil's drug for good reason.
It is. And I was seeing evil things. I was seeing entities at one point in the house, 100%. And when I got better, they explained it to me like this. This is the scientific version they gave me once I got to this state hospital. So I got up there. I get to Vernon maximum security mental hospital for the criminally insane shortly after. I'm now free from county jail. I've beaten the case, but I get to this hospital. There's big gun turrets and guard towers and razor wire. And I called it Mars. It's out in the middle of nowhere. They don't want to risk letting the people out who live there. I mean, I pictured bloodhounds chasing an escaped mental patient through the field when I pulled up. I was like, this place is bizarre. So I walked in, they did an STD and blood panel on me with a CDC lab that they had right there on site. And that was terrifying because of the lifestyle I lived. I'm now healed, and I realized 5 minutes into my trip, Vernon State Hospital Behavioral Health Unit, which is like one of the worst ones they put me at, and I was the most high-functioning patient they were ever going to run into. I was healed by that point. So I get there. This
reminds me of that book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yes.
Your story, I don't know if you've read that yet, but your story is very similar to that. A sane guy locked into a mental hospital and his perspective on it.
Right. And I'm going to paint the picture for everybody right now, what it feels and looks like. So you go in, and then when they put you in the unit, it looks kind of like a hospital waiting room. There's rooms that line the unit. Half is female, half is male. It's a co-ed situation, the one I was on at that point. So this is a maximum security. This is for your true blue serial killers that you will see on the ABC News. I was in there with the guy who killed a pastor and stabbed 3 people, and he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. I was in there with another guy who shot the chief of police in his town. He was found not guilty, and the list goes on and on. Serial murderers, the herders of women and children, the worst of the worst. It was an absolutely demonic, evil experience. Just even the first 40 minutes. The first 10 minutes I'm on the unit, I saw a man's face just crushed in by another patient. He shattered his nose. And then I saw what the restraints chair was about. Vernon is a restraints hospital. They came up behind this man. They stuck what I called the rhino dart right here. It was Benadryl, Thorazine, and something else in a cocktail. And his eyes literally jellied rolled in the back of his head. He collapsed. They put him in a chair, strapped him down, wheeled him into a little tiny padded room, and had a tech sitting there with a clipboard. And he was in there for a good 5 hours before he woke up. So if you would get out of pocket at Vernon State, so say a patient got up and was starting to get aggressive, the techs, they had the shots in the fridge ready to go. The nurse did. So they would walk up, they'd give you one warning. They'd say, you better calm down right now. I would see the fear come over people because they've seen, even in their deluded psychotic state, they've seen the restraint chair or been in it before, and they don't want that to happen again. It's so torturous. So I've heard them giving people too much of the shot and not making it. Okay, this is day 1. Day 2, noon, I get morning meds, chow. Day 2, lunchtime meds come around. They say, Durkin, meds. I go up there. I'm like, I don't take noon meds. I hadn't taken noon meds the whole entire time I was in jail. My charts transferred, everything. Like, I wasn't supposed to be on noon meds. I took some meds for my psychosis, but I also took meds to sleep, and that was it. And I took them all at night. They said, you're taking these. And you don't ask questions. You take the pills that you're given, or else I'm a 46C. If I get aggressive, if I raise my voice, it's another 6 months on your evaluation. Okay, so they gave me this Dixie cup full of pills. I swallowed them down. 40 minutes later, I am crawling back up to the med, drooling buckets out of my mouth. I mean, buckets. I've never experienced anything like that. One of the side effects of some of these antipsychotics is you drool like you're dying, basically. So I crawled like the Walking Dead, like that zombie on the ground. And I was begging them for help. They dragged me back to my bed and threw me in my bed and told me to sleep it off. That's a true story. That really happened to me. And my heart was beating 1,000 paces a minute. I thought I was not going to make it that day. So I was in Vernon for 2.5 months. It was hell. I went before the Danger Review Board. I go to San Antonio State Hospital. This is where it gets really interesting.
Did you see any psychiatrists while you were there? And what was your experience with them?
Okay. You have a treatment team in the state hospital system. You see the psychiatrist maybe once a week, and guess what they're doing? It's not therapy, Jerry. You know this. They're adjusting your medications. And that's all it's about. How are you feeling? Are you sleeping okay? Can you go to the bathroom? And it's almost like they're drawing things out of the patients, knowing they're going to say, I can't sleep. Oh, you need multiple doses of trazodone and Seroquel and all these other pills. So they ended up putting me on nine medications that I did not need. I'm just being dosed with pills. The way it works is there's no one-on-one therapy at the state hospital. I did 8.5 months in 2 different state hospitals. I never not once saw a doctor walk out onto the floor. I never not once got called in not one therapy session. There is no getting better. And society looks at state hospitals and say, that's where they put sick people to get better. That's where they put sick people to be human cattle with an earmark so they can pill them and sell them drugs. Because all it is it's chow, meds, noon chow, meds, dinner chow, meds. And that's it. And you watch TV the entire rest of the time. There's 2 TVs, one on each end of the pod. They have couches that look like they belong in a hospital, and they drug you, and you watch TV to keep you docile. Okay? So I passed the Danger Review Board. I go to San Antonio State Hospital, or otherwise known as SASH. SASH is a lower restrictive hospital with no restraints policies. It's actually against the law to restrain a patient at that hospital unless they're in an immediate act of violence and in the act of the violence. So, for example, a patient could crush the skull of another patient, and I've seen it with my own eyes, and I actually kept records of this. And as long as the victim the assailant puts their hands up and steps back and stops acting so aggressive, they can't touch them. Staff can only circle around them. Patient-on-patient crime in these hospitals is not prosecuted. You could beat me half to death, for example. And the cops will show up and take a report, but I have to get out of the state hospital and go down once I'm free to file the charges on that report, because when you go into a state hospital, you are stripped of all of your human rights as a United States citizen. That's a fact. Okay? So you have no rights. I've watched women be brutally beaten, SA'd in the bathrooms, and they have schizophrenia. They have no way of defending themselves. There's no way that those patients, if they're lucky enough to get out, are going to have the cognitive idea to go to a police station and file charges against their assailant. So these crimes that happen within the state hospital just go unnoticed, unreported a lot of times. I witnessed cover-ups like you wouldn't believe. So
what do they call that? The ward of the state? That's what they call it.
You're a ward of the state. You're stripped of your right to even stand trial. So that's a 46B. Those are people awaiting trial that have to prove that they're sane enough to go before a judge. That's most of the people in there. The other ones have been found guilty. There was like 2 out of 200 of us. That's how rare the insanity finding is.
And I can tell you, I've witnessed those cover-ups also. You know, where
yes, and so like what you were saying, Jerry,
and they just cover from one another.
What you were saying about the students and the people who come from the outside, they would monitor us so close when those people would come in to do their studies. It's like medical students. They would come in, they'd sit with a clipboard, and then staff would stay right next to you. If you started getting any kind of out of pocket or telling them too much, the meeting's over. Okay? So yeah, I'm totally
so much for any research being carried on the front lines. It all comes out of the universities, and that's all controlled by Big Pharma.
Right, and they write the medical journals that sell the pills to us, that make it okay, you know, that help the symptoms. So I'm on all these medications. San Antonio State Hospital turns out to be about 10 times more violent than Vernon maximum security. I was on this unit called the Crockett unit at San Antonio State Hospital. People being punched in the face while you're watching TV. People, all kinds of just vile, the most despicable human behavior I've ever witnessed. I'm in the most crazy environment that a human being could be in, and I am completely sane. I had to stare at the floor and go to a happy place just to keep my sanity just from the speech I would hear. Never mind what I would see. The showers are teeming with sexual perverts and rapists and all kinds of just deviant characters that would stare at you in the shower and threaten you and everything else. People were urinating on themselves and defecating. And in the name of clients' rights, they couldn't force people to change their clothes and shower. So people were sitting in their own feces. People were sitting in their own urine. Their pants were black with dirt. And they didn't even offer to bribe them with an ice cream sandwich to go take a shower. And later on, I found out that that worked very well because I started to have this fight in me. I went to the doctor one day. I had sexual problems. That was the final straw. I said, I'm not going to live like this. I walked into my doctor and I said, I am not taking these pills not one more day. And if you have to force drug me with them, then so be it. But I won't willingly take these. And he says, why should I take you off your pills? Explain it to me. And he was actually a really cool guy, this doctor. He was this African-American gentleman. He was amazing. And I explained to him, I said, I was on drugs for almost 3 years before my crime. I was out of my mind. I had a healing in jail. I said, God healed me and I'm totally fine. And they knew I was high functioning. They knew I was healed. The staff would tell me, they're like, you don't even belong here, Patrick. So this doctor listens to me and he says, oh my God. He goes, you were doing drugs? He goes, you shouldn't even be here. This is a big mistake. And I said, I told everybody. And he calls the social worker in. I was terrified they were going to overturn my not guilty verdict. And my lawyer later explained that'd be double jeopardy. They couldn't do anything. But this doctor agrees to take me off all medication for a 4-month evaluation. If I didn't show signs of delusion or aggressive behavior or violence, I would be left off the medication indefinitely after this 4 months. He signed the order and he submitted it and they couldn't change it as long as I didn't do anything wrong. So now I'm off pills. I'm one of the only patients in the history of San Antonio State Hospital, a Draculian facility that's been around since the 1800s. They used to take spikes, and a doctor told me this. The 1800s, the elites would send homosexual patients, people with that were slow, low-functioning people. The elites would send their unwanted children there, and they would shove a spike into their eyes and do lobotomies that way. And now they're just doing it with medications. And I used to see pictures from the 30s and 40s that were framed on the wall as I'm wiping the walls down at my job for $7 a day. And it would be these vacant, zombie-looking patients that have all had physical lobotomies in their brains.
How did that facility stay open through that entire time? Because normally a lot of what they called them back then was insane asylums. And a lot of them were shut down due to this kind of, you know, behavior. Like they researchers would come in and they would film there, and then it would be on the news, and then it would get shut down. So
well, I can't imagine them allowing that to happen. They wouldn't let a researcher in there with cameras. I never saw.
But when did that change though? Because that's a fact though. That a lot of them in the early 1900s and up until the 70s, a lot of them got shut down because researchers would come in.
I think Stash was one of the older ones, and it remained open. It was, I mean, it's from the 1800s. An actual doctor told me these stories about the spikes. She's like, that's the history of this hospital. It's got big brick buildings, and like they're really old in the front. And then they have a new facility. So during this time, so I get off the medication, okay? Now the ball's turning. The judge finds out about that I was on drugs. It was a big mistake. A bee's nest was tipped over in this, okay? Everyone's coming to talk to me, yada, yada, yada. So now I kind of see that I have this upper hand. Now I've saw so much violence, so much abuse and neglect that I started keeping journals because I'm a very intelligent person. I start keeping names of patients, victims, names of assailants. I start keeping dates and times. Okay. I'm recording everything I see. And one day the whole place is pounding on the windows. It was like being in a zoo in the chimpanzee department. Okay. I lost it for a minute and I started to raise my voice and I was shaming them, swearing. A nurse came over and she said, she goes, you're getting drugged. And I was like, my heart sank. I was like, oh, I just screwed everything up. I'm going to get put back on the medication. I was making headway. I'm done. So they told me that it's not 30 days, by the way. An average time for a safety eval is 3.5 to 5 years. And anything you do will extend that. So I'm there and I'm witnessing all this stuff. I'm recording all this stuff. This nurse all of a sudden has a heart and she comes back all of a sudden. It was a miracle. And she says, Mr. Durkin, I'm going to give you one opportunity to calm down. And if you calm down, I'm not going to put this in your chart because I know that you're in a very tough situation. You're not crazy and I won't report this and we won't drug you. She said, she comes back and she says, if you write a letter, if you don't like the way things are here at San Antonio State Hospital, and this is just the nurse who was on the floor. She says, if you write this letter, I will put it in an envelope and I will take it up to the White House and deliver it personally. Now, the White House is a big building up on the edge of San Antonio State Hospital where all the top brass sit. Doctors so powerful that they can wave a stroke of a pen and set you free no matter what you've done. Okay? These are your shot callers in the state hospital system at the top level of this hospital. I wrote a 4-page letter in 5 minutes, and I explained to them that I am an educated person. I'm well-spoken. I used to be in business. I said that I had figured out a way to get my cell phone into the facility legally by reading my client's rights handbook. I think I was the only person cognitive enough in the history of the hospital to ever read this client's rights handbook that everyone's mandated to get. So I read the book and I found a loophole. If my mom took the camera out of my cell phone, I would now have contact to the outside world. I was legally allowed to have a device in the state hospital system. That's exactly what I did. So before this incident, my mom sent me a phone.
Did they change that after you left?
I don't think that they can. They have to change it at a state legislative level in Austin. They might have done that after this, but I'm not sure. We'd have to check into that. But I had the phone. There was just no camera because they can't let you record. They use the banner of HIPAA, where you could violate another patient's HIPAA rights, but really it's because they don't want the atrocities being uncovered, okay? So I have the phone. I write this letter, and I said, I'm going to take my name, all the names, the dates, and the times of all these victims and absolutely terrible incidents. I saw a woman beat to death out underneath a tree. She was almost beat to death. She lived. She was in a wheelchair for about a month. She was a short woman. She was in her early 20s, and a big male went over and beat her in the face and started kicking her with his closed-toed shoe out underneath the tree, and she was just covered in blood. The techs couldn't even stop him. He was wandering around the unit for 45 minutes after this incident. The girl's outside bleeding. So they couldn't restrain him because he stopped beating her. It was wild. So I had stuff like that in my bag of tricks, in my arsenal. So I write the letter, I put it in there, and I said, I'm going to take the names, dates, and times and incidents to the local and state media. And the longer that you keep me in this hospital, the longer, the bigger of a problem you're going to have from Patric Durk. Every time something happens, I'm going to make it an issue because I saw some really bad cover-ups. So she took the letter up there, and by God, somebody opened that letter up at the White House at the top level, and it got passed all the way to the top. Now, they didn't tell me what was going on, but staff had become friends with me because they felt bad that I was totally sane in this terrible situation. So staff was feeding me inside information that they were getting during their stand-up meetings that they have before they go on shift. So they told me, this one guy said, you're being moved to Fannin, man. He goes, it's coming today. And I said, okay. I said, they're going to punish me. Fannin was an all-male unit, and it was full of pedophiles and murderers and the people too dangerous to be around the opposite sex. Let's put it that way. So my doctor comes, he goes, you're being moved to Fannin, just like clockwork. The guy who took me off the medication. So they moved me to this all-male unit. I'm now waging war against a very evil, very corrupt state hospital system. And I said, I'm going to get my release secured. I'm going to get out of this place. So it was an act of miracles. I believe God put me in situations everywhere they moved me. Something big would pop off. The hospital would have poor behavior. For example, there was a patient-on-patient sexual assault between 3 men. It was like 2 mentally challenged patients and 1 more adult-thinking patient who was paying them to go into the shower with him, with sodas and candy and things like that. There's currency in there. We can get care packages. So he was bribing these men to go in there. One of them had HIV. Okay? And the hospital covered it up. They found these men in the shower together. They covered it up. And this guy was a serial predator. He was an older African-American male with an ankle bracelet on because he was so dangerous that they had to have an ankle monitor on him so that if he escaped, they didn't want to take any chances. He had violent sexual thoughts every waking hours. I looked his court records up while I was in the institution on my cell phone. So I took it upon myself. My mom was sending me big care packages. I had unlimited chips and commissary and sodas and everything. So I said, I'm going to take this system on. I start bribing like one of the victims for 3 sodas and a bag of M&Ms. I said, give me your sister's phone number. And I would call her and say, I'm sorry. I know that you're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm not. I need you to call the hospital and verify this information that I'm going to tell you. She did. Adult Protective Services would swarm the unit. Now, the hospital is very dangerous. I was scared that they were going to kill me at one point. I would sleep on my cell phone underneath my chest because I thought they were going to steal it or break it on purpose because I was causing a lot of problems. I saved a man's foot. They stopped bandaging a 26-year-old male's foot. His foot was rotting. They wouldn't change the dressing because it was too much of a mess because he kept pulling it off. So he had gangrene forming in his foot. I bribed him, got his dad's phone number. They got a lawyer. They ended up saving the man's foot. I was causing all types of problems. I wrote 12 letters in all. So the final straw. So I didn't know it at the time, but they were moving me because they wanted to get rid of me. But I had to stay in San Antonio State Hospital legally on a felony 1 for the last part of the journey for at least 6 months. So it was supposed to be 3.5 to 5 years, but the day it hit 6 months at the last stop on the hospital, I could be released. So I'm causing all these problems. My roommate was deranged. His name is Olafalabal. That's his last name. He's in the news report. So,
oh yeah, we have that clip. You want me to play?
Yes, and I just want to set it up. He threatened to murder his wife and child. The hospital heard him on the phone threatening to kill them, and they covered it up because they didn't want to do the paperwork. They didn't restrict him from visits. They did nothing. He comes up to me underneath the tree one day. I was sitting outside underneath the picnic table getting some sun. After all that medication, months and months, I was trying to like soak up vitamins and nutrients any way I could. So he comes up to me and says, "Hey, man, I'm going to go get this 20 grand somebody owes me." And everyone's lunacy in there. It's just they're lunatics. So it's like, you don't listen to what people say. I went inside, and about 15 minutes later, the bells go off. The whistles are being blown. He had gotten 2 mentally challenged patients to form a human wall in the Fannin unit. He climbed them, hopped over the wall, and literally just walked off the property. So now San Antonio has a very violent, escaped mental patient with 5 violent felonies, okay? And he's now wandering the streets. Now, they did call the police, but guess what they didn't do? They didn't call the local media to alert the public. There's an apartment community right behind San Antonio State Hospital, and he walked directly through it where there's children playing. Now, I didn't know this at the time either, but San Antonio State Hospital at the time was building a $320 million building. And then I found it right around this time on the internet that this project, the local police department, local colleges were all investors in this project. It turns out, and you can find this on the internet, this is how I found it out and confirmed it with the staff and doctors. SASH was getting $1,100 a day per patient back then, not including the medication. This is state funds. They were making millions and millions of dollars off of us cattle that were in there. The pills, I can't even tell you. It must be triple that. But they were making so much money. That's why people don't leave. So the hospital didn't need any bad press, so they kept it out of the media that this man escaped. I have my cell phone. I cook up a plan. I said, I'm going to blow this thing wide open. I get on to Ken's 5, and I message the news reporter, and I say, do y'all want a story about an escaped mental patient? And whoever was on the other end returned, you can't have a phone in the state hospital. So with some quick thinking, because I wasn't crazy, I dropped a GPS pin from inside the Fannin unit. Immediately, a message comes back. What's this guy's name? I got to verify that story. They called a hospital after I gave them the name. They called a hospital. They verify the story. Now, he could be out there going to kill his wife and kid. That was the last thing that he said. So I was thinking, okay, let's do good in 2 areas. I'll secure my release, and I'll save that woman and child, possibly. So they didn't even call the victim. They didn't even call his wife, okay? I know that is fact because she was calling the unit while he was missing. So set up the clip, and this is the news story that ran later that night. Well, this is the one from the next day that blew it all wide open.
No sign of a convicted felon who walked away from the San Antonio State Hospital. He's been missing for more than 24 hours now, but he's not the first patient to wander away from that community from that psychiatric facility. Eyewitness News reporter Marvin Hurst has more on the disturbing disappearances and the rising number of visits the hospital gets from police.
The Texas Department of Health and Human Services says once they've alerted the authorities about a missing patient, they've done all they could do. San Antonio police say mental patient Christian Olivo Fariel made what they described as an unauthorized departure from the hospital. They have not seen the convicted felon since. He's been in jail for drug charges, forgery, evading arrest, burglary, and an unauthorized use of a vehicle. DHHS won't confirm a name, but they would say that the person went over a fence to leave the facility Wednesday evening. They won't call it an escape just because this is a hospital and not a jail. They did say that the person is a forensic patient, meaning they are not mentally able to stand trial or too insane to be convicted. 3 years ago, another forensic mental patient got away from the San Antonio State Hospital. His name, Gary Lejeune. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity of murdering and dismembering his wife's body near Kerrville. He was committed to a state hospital for Rebecca Lejeune's killing. A state representative had to move the man for public safety because the accused murderer kept walking away from the hospital. A press officer for DHHS says they do a review after each incident of a missing person. San Antonio police are spending more time at the San Antonio State Hospital. Their calls for service to that hospital jumped past 1,300. Police responded for more assault calls than any other offense. Missing person calls total 10 in 2 years, but some of the cases are wanted persons too. State officials say they are researching these numbers before they can make a comment. Right now, 29-year-old Olivo Fabriel remains missing. Marvin Hurst, KENS 5, Eyewitness News.
So you blow this whole story up with your cell phone inside of this mental institution. Now, this might sound like a silly question, Patric, but how were you charging your cell phone?
Oh, I had a charger with it, and they would charge it behind the med desk.
I was going to say, because I highly doubt that there would be any electrical sockets in any of the rooms.
They force you to charge it back there, and the staff that was in charge of that, I was friends with. So I trusted them. And the thing about it is, when you blow something like this wide open, I mean, look at the city of San Antonio, 5 patients per year escaping. And I mean, these people are absolutely murderous criminals, and they're not reporting it to the public. So when this story broke, they shut the gates at San Antonio State Hospital for the first time in years. The whole place began to be locked down. I was at work the following Monday, and I was wiping the walls down, and my social worker came up to me, my new one. She had a stack of files this big, because that's how big my files were with all the problems I was causing. And she said, "Mr. Durkin, my job is to get you out of here today." And she said it just like that. They had enough of Patric Durkin. And there was a lot of red tape to go through. They had to find an aftercare plan and this and that. They tried to put me in drug treatment for 2 years. But they had already sent a letter at that point saying that I was safe to go back into society. And the judge deemed it against my constitutional rights. So that was out. They just wanted to get rid of me. They devised a plan. They needed aftercare housing. So they couldn't find even a shelter that would take me for some reason in Corpus Christi. They wanted to bring me back to my home city. So they got frustrated, and I just told them, I go, I will blow open everything I see in here from here on out. It sped the process up. Now, my release, I had a court date set immediately. They wanted me to be released immediately. I had to go to court one last time. My lawyer had to represent me while I wasn't there. So Martin Scorsese goes to court. It was on a Friday. They told me I'm going home. I have my bags packed at the front door. Okay, literally sitting there from 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, waiting for the transport van. They never come. My lawyer, I get in touch with him in the afternoon. I'm like, "What's going on?" He goes, "I can't talk about it right now. You're not going home today, but you just got to sit tight and you got to trust me." So I sat all weekend terrified, not knowing what was going on. Are they going to keep me? See, they wanted to, the stipulations for release for a person who's been found not guilty by reason of insanity are as follows. You have to see a psychiatrist once a month for the rest of your natural life. The maximum term of your crime, mine was 99 years on the major charge. So for the rest of my breathing life, I had to see a psychiatrist once a month, a social worker once a week, and be drug tested for the rest of my natural life. So Monday comes around, the court date's set. And what had happened is my lawyer said, "We're not going for that," to the judge. During my trial, the judge said, "Mr. Durkin, you have a very fine attorney. I suggest that you listen to everything he says." He was high ranking. They had a relationship. She told him to go home over the weekend and draw up his own order. He came back into court Monday, and he got me released with no stipulations of any kind. So when I came home that Monday from back to Corpus, they drove me back to my home city with a transport van, which is unheard of. They usually put you on a bus. They wanted to make sure I was released. So they brought me home. I got off the bus, and he said, "All you have to do is go up into that building and sign up for outpatient drug treatment." He's like, "You don't even really have to go." He's like, "Just go sign up." I ended up going to the drug treatment for a while after that, just because I wanted to. But I was released. He said, "This crime is almost like it never happened." He's like, "You're a free man with no criminal record, and you're free to move about as much as you want." I was on a mission from God. I knew it. I knew I couldn't lose. When God kept calling me through each of those scary doors, when I would write a letter, I busted through the door, even though it was lined with a brick wall, and I walked through the flames, and I became a warrior of justice for people that didn't have a voice within the state hospital. The hallowed screams of the lost are in that building at all times. There's people that do not have a voice. They're being forcibly drugged. They're being forcibly medicated. And it's all in the name of the almighty dollar. As far as I know, they built that $320 million addition to San Antonio State Hospital. And I went about my life. And one of the last things, I had a treatment team meeting with, I called him Dr. No Good in the book, a character based on the real guy in real life. And it was a team of scientists. And there was two techs, African-American ladies, sitting in the back of the room. And he was furious that I was being released. And he said, "You shouldn't even be here." And I said, "Don't talk to me like that." And I said, "Yes, I should be here." I said, "God sent me here to take on this evil, corrupt system and see the atrocities within the four walls of this building. And he sent me here to do something about it." And I did. And I sat back in my chair and his jaw dropped. I mean, you're not supposed to talk about God during a safety evaluation for the criminally insane to be released. It's not a smart move. But I knew I couldn't lose at that point. So he looked at me and I said, "I am spiritual. I am not crazy. There's a big difference." And the two ladies in the back started laughing. And I was released.
Tell them about the choice you made where you had a choice between continuing on to the dark side or turning around.
Well, this was a crossroads moment, I call it. After the supernatural experiences that I had, I remember sitting in my kitchen at my dad's house, or my grandparents' old house, and I just had this feeling that I was at a crossroads moment and I could choose God or I could choose the devil. But whichever one I chose, I was going to go all the way with. And I started weighing the options. That's how sick I was. I was thinking crazy things. I'm like, if I'm going to be bad, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And I ended up going into the psychosis and I walked towards the light. And ultimately that changed the trajectory of my life. And I believe that's why God set me free and did the miracles. When I was in there as well, they found I had a problem with my blood. They said that my spleen was 4 times the size. I thought I had HIV or hepatitis C because of the lifestyle I was living. They're like, no. They were sure I had cirrhosis. Long story short is, my liver was completely healed. The spleen was 1 point below normal and climbing, an unexplainable miracle healing, just like my psychosis of my brain. When that healing happened, this is number 2. And they said, if you never take another drink again, you're going to live a completely normal life. This was a cancer blood specialist. And they asked me my drinking history, and I told them, and she said, I've never told anybody this before, but in your story, because you started doing methamphetamines and stopped drinking so abruptly, that meth actually saved your life. And that's not something I recommend to anybody, because meth took me into a part of Hades that I can't even describe in the human word. It was living hell on earth. But God did amazing miracles in my life. And you're right, Ryder, it's a journey. And my life story is a journey. Since my release, I wrote Fire and Ice, the Meth Bible, while I was homeless and clean. I got out on December 16th, 2019. On January 1st of 2020, I started writing the book in trap house motels, an Oxford house. I finished it up in this swanky canal house on Padre Island. And then I came to Washington after I wrapped the book, and my life has been forever changed. God told me if I came here, my life would change. I drove across the country with almost no money. It's an amazing story. My second book, Deep Washington, that's underway right now, is going to be about that journey. But
how long were you at the psychiatric facility? I remember you saying that you were in the jail for 10 months and then you were transferred. How long were you at the state mental hospital?
8.5 months. So one of the cool parts of the story too is they explained to me that people with heavy methamphetamine abuse, it takes 18 months of abstinence for your brain to fully repair itself after such an event. I almost did 18 months to the day. And so I did 8.5 months in 2 different hospitals, Vernon and Sash. So it was 8.5 months total. And it was 6 months flat at San Antonio, 2.5 at Vernon. And I got out and I was released. I have a day career where I do millions of dollars in sales. I was recognized at a state level this year for the state of Washington and what I do in my day career. I have this book being read in 6 countries around the planet. And I wrote a 716-page book that people seem to like and value. And I did it in 6 months to the day. And I looked it up, and that's the same words per day that Stephen King writes. And I have a 6th grade education. Where does that come from? And where does all the miracle healings come from and all the blessings in my life afterwards come from? It's a spiritual life. The unseen realm is a lot more real than the physical flesh and bone reality that we live in. And God is real. And that's why I'm alive and free, is to put this message out into the planet that methamphetamines are not the end of your life. If you choose to walk towards the light, then you will recover from it, and you can live a miracle, joyful life afterwards. And mental illness.
Now, what was the food like within this mental health facility? Because from my understanding, they want to get you eating as much as you can. They want you to gain a lot of weight. They want to drug you. They want to make it almost impossible for you to ever leave.
Average weight gain at San Antonio State Hospital, this is from staff, 30 to 70 pounds. I was in jail at 178 pounds during my addiction. I actually lost a lot more weight because they starve you in Oasis County Jail. And then I ballooned to 300 pounds at the time of my release.
Yeah, that is unbelievable. Now, how did you stay sane? I mean, from your testimony here, you became sane while you were in jail, and then you were sane at the whole time that you were no more psychosis while you were at the mental health facility. How did that feel, being around a lot of criminally insane people that were basically out of their mind 24/7? How did you stay sane during that amount of time?
Well, I mean, just picture this. You're playing chess or checkers with a man who's explaining to you how he was accused of strangling his wife with her own pantyhose. I mean, these are the people I was brushing shoulders with, having conversations with. I mean, it was absolutely mind-bending, super depressing. I believe I have some form of PTSD from it, but I don't recognize it. I don't live there anymore. I don't live in fear anymore. But I mean, when I hear a whistle go off, that kind of triggers me a little bit, because that's when the violence would break out. And you usually heard a whistle and saw something extremely rough. So yeah, the residual effects were really hard. And I would have to look at the floor to answer your question. And I would go to a happy place. I would think of my children. I would think of the book I was going to write. I was on my cell phone writing short stories about my addiction on my cell phone and releasing them onto the internet. And that's what became Fire and Ice, the Meth Bible, once I was released. So I would do things. I would write, express my feelings. Writing is a cathartic thing. It's very therapeutic. It helped me get my feelings across. I helped deal with my father's death. My mom died 6 months after I got out. I mean, life has been a journey and a painful one for me at that, but I don't regret not one bit. I'm stronger than I've ever been, and now I lead a worldwide movement against the devil and crystal meth all over the planet, reaching South Africa, Australia, and everywhere in between, coast to coast, the United States. It's been incredible.
Now, Ryder, you were saying researchers got in there and kind of exposed this. To be honest, with the psychiatric mafia, none of the establishments I've worked in over my mental health career were as bad as what Patric is describing. I'd say the state hospital was maybe less than half as bad. Now, they had a building for the criminally insane on the grounds of Central State Hospital, but none of the rest of the staff were allowed to go there. We could go to any other building on the entire campus, but none of us were allowed in that particular building. But the other side,
there was an old man who was my roommate at one point, and let's call him Garza, just to call him Garza. He was like 75, 80 years old, total dementia, didn't even know where he was, had the mind of a child, and he would take his mattress and put it on the floor next to my bed, and he would hold my hand while he slept because he was scared of the dark. And he would go to the bathroom in his diaper, and they refused to change him. So I would take him into the bathroom, and I changed his diaper. I took it off and helped him put a fresh one on, and staff knew I was doing this because they refused, and I could not let that man. I started to have a heart of compassion for people, as sad as it was, and The sad part is that those people that are in there so lost and mentally deranged and drugged up like that, those are someone's grandpa. Those are somebody's daughter, brother, sister. Those are our brothers and sisters. And they are being exploited. They are being forcibly drugged and given pills for money. And that's a fact. And I go on record saying that it's an absolute atrocity to mankind what they're doing. And if it was their brother and sister in there, I guarantee you they wouldn't want them treated the same way that people are being treated today.
Well, those antipsychotic drugs shrink the brain. They cause permanent neurological damage with long-term use. Now, they won't ever tell you that. You know, I've never seen a psychiatrist tell the patient that. But on the other hand, none of the hospitals I've worked at were as bad as what Patric is describing. None of the private hospitals were even a fraction as bad. But what they did all rely upon was these psychiatric drugs, these neuroleptics, to just dumb these people down. And the only reason they appeared to work is because they were major tranquilizers. They just calmed them down. I never saw them cure anybody. Because as soon as they were released or as soon as they went off those drugs, the psychosis came back.
Look, this story, I'll tell you this. This is another picture of Vernon. I was there, and there was a woman there she was found not guilty by reason of insanity because she put her children in a bathtub with plywood and she stood on top of it. There was a man who was also in there. He was a Satanist who played the organ and the piano. He played the organ in our church service inside. Okay, they were having a relationship that staff somehow had masked. I don't know if they were bribed or whatever, but the woman and the man, he was a serial killer who killed 10 prostitutes from Louisiana to Texas. He would hit him over the head with a bowling pin and stuff a bird in his mouth. Staff told me this. And she had the thing with the children. He ends up impregnating her. She had just unalived her children in a bathtub, and now she's pregnant, and they're having a serial killer baby within the walls of Vernon Hospital. Stuff like this happens every single day. It's an insane, insane place, the Texas State Hospital system. They moved the man, and the child is out there somewhere.
Wow. How many people did you see released in your pod during that 8-month period at the mental health facility?
Well, I took a cheeseburger that was worth $3 retail and a 10-cent Coke. And I was watching people who assaulted children in gas station bathrooms walk out before me. So there's that. And then there's also people who never leave. There's people, the system is completely broken, completely mixed up. And if you look at the tent cities that line the highways going into every major city in the United States right now, those are all dual diagnosis, drug-addicted mental patients, and they're going in and out of the state system, and they're not getting any help. We are the richest country on the planet, and that's why I'm an advocate for this. We are sending billions and trillions overseas to all different types of countries, and our own people are living in zombie towns all over the United States. To me, that's an absolute crime. It's a crime against our own people. It's treasonous, if you ask me. And I think that the wheels of change need to be set in motion. And I think that there needs to be a huge reform at the state level that regulates state hospital systems all over this nation.
Well, there's got to be a huge reform in the way they approach mental illness. The psychiatric mafia and big pharma have everybody brainwashed that the only way to treat mental illness is with these pills.
Have you heard of a shamanic crisis before? Do you know what that term is?
Yeah,
it's a shamanic crisis is very, it's a shamanic crisis is a phenomenon. Indigenous tribes all over the United States and all over the world, goat herders in Afghanistan, Mongolia, anywhere where there's indigenous people that don't use Western medicine. When someone has a psychotic break like schizophrenia, when they have one like bipolar 1, those people aren't put on psychotropic drugs. They're put with an older mentor who's been through the call, they call it, the shamanic call, where they've been through a crisis. They mentor these people in 40% more of the time, statistically. It's on YouTube all over the place. They walk these people through, and then when they're healed, those people aren't stigmatized as crazy. They're lifted up. They're revered as the healers and the shamans in these tribes and communities. and they come out 40% of the time more than our mental patients on all these high-tech drugs do. I just don't see how that isn't being studied. And why isn't it being put into practice? Why aren't we bringing peer support in and having people mentored and walked through the fire on mental illness when it heals you almost twice as much as these pills?
Because there's too much money being made.
Exactly.
Because psychiatrists and big pharma are making $4.7 billion a year selling these drugs. So what they're teaching in the schools as far as psychotherapy doesn't work. And they're blocking the stuff that does work. There's something called the MACE energy method out there that actually will cure like 80% of common mental illness, not psychosis, but depression, anxiety, bipolar, OCD, PTSD. Right. It will cure it, and they're blocking it. They just completely ignore it. I mean, it's been brought between. It was developed in Australia. It was brought up before their legislature, who ignored it. They took it up to the university and said, "Listen, we'll show you this works. Why don't you teach it?" They said, "Well, we'll teach it if you give us the rights to it, the copyright." Now, this therapy is available to anybody right now. You can go to www.maceenergymethod.com/about/, and there's a whole list of MACE therapists that will cure most of your psychological problems at a fraction of the price of what psychiatry charges to drug your brain, which doesn't cure anything. They're trying to cure a spiritual illness, which is energetic. Thoughts are energetic. Memories are energetic. Feelings are energetic. All that's energetic. It's like trying to discharge a magnet by pouring Thorazine on it. It just
if it's not spiritual, Jerry, why are all the meth addicts around the planet, and I'm talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, why are we all having the same evil experiences with evil spirits, shadow people, evil voices, the devil? Why is it always evil? Why aren't you seeing unicorns jumping over the fence? It's because it's a portal straight to hell. It's a witch's brew drug made with red phosphorus that's literally made with burnt bones. It's pharmakia. It's a gateway to hell that opens something chemically in the brain, and it opens up the spiritual world, and it's called the devil's drug, because when you mess with it, that's who you're going to get.
And I've been studying the psychotic voices that schizophrenics hear for decades. They run fixed, repeatable patterns, and they're all negative.
So would you say that they're persons without bodies, Jerry? Like they're evil entities that have personality?
I would say. These are entities with personality. They have reason. They are diabolical. They are parasites. They bring the person down to a low energetic level, and then they take their energy. And you can talk to any schizophrenic who's hearing voices. You ask them how much energy they have before the voices come and how much energy they have after, and they will tell you they are drained after the voices attack them. Okay?
Your book detailed that.
Entities.
Your book detailed that, and especially the story about the crackling, the arc welder in the wall. Like I had the experience in the Meth Bible with the sparks shooting up out of the stove. There was something in the electricity. We live in a world of energy and vibration. We live in a very electrical, spiritual world, and I mean they communicate through energy. I mean, that's why people see apparitions. Shadow people is a huge one. We do shows about it, endless shows about what people see. We do videos endlessly about what people see. It's always negative. It's never positive. And then God will show up near the very end in most of these people's stories. And I say most of them that have made it out. God will show up and give you a choice. And it's your choice which road you walk the rest of the way.
Is those hallucinations due partly to sleep deprivation, though? We were talking about this a little bit earlier before the show, Patrick, because we know that if you don't sleep for a long period of time, and that's what methamphetamine does, it doesn't allow you to go to sleep. So do you think that some of these hallucinations or delusions are due to not necessarily the drug, but the side effect of the drug and not being able to sleep?
When Christ, Yeshua, went into the desert and he met the devil, he didn't eat for 40 days. We were fasting for the devil is what we call it. It's a term. We were living a debaucherous life, not eating, not sleeping, not drinking water, and we saw spiritual things. And the veil has been torn from our eyes. I think that it's a revelation because of the combination of everything: sleep deprivation, starving yourself of food and water. And I think that the fasting creates an experience 100%.
Well, also the psychotic voices don't want the patient to sleep, because if they can wear them out and deprive them of sleep, then they're more suggestible. You know,
Jerry, what
so
what did the voices say about the 23rd Psalm?
Well, they hate it. That's one of the first things I noticed when I worked at the state hospital. I had patients come to me. One of them said his voice, when he repeated the 23rd Psalm, the voices reacted like worms thrown onto a hot frying pan. So I started checking that out. That is consistent. The voices can't stand the 23rd Psalm. They can't stand Psalm 91. Now, why would a hallucination? The psychiatric mafia insists that these voices are hallucinations, despite the fact that they run patterns, despite the fact that they have not done a single study on them at all. They just went, we hereby declare that they're hallucinations because we said so. And you must believe it.
Why would a chemical imbalance care about words out of an old book? It's ridiculous to think otherwise.
Why would a hallucination care? Why are these voices consistently negative? You know, if they're hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia says, why are they consistently negative? Why aren't they sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes neutral? Why aren't they all over the place like regular hallucinations are? This is inconsistent with what they're saying. You know, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? Why would a hallucination foster and create negative emotion? You know, why would it energetically drain the victim? I mean, there's all these patterns. They get louder after sunset. They're
all the hallmarks of the devil. The voices are telling people to hurt themselves. They're telling them that nobody loves them. They're telling them that God doesn't exist. They're telling them all these hateful, negative things that really drain the energy out of people and give them no life.
Exactly right. They tell them they're ugly, you're stupid, nobody loves you, you're crazy.
Your wife's cheating on you, this and that.
Cheating on you. All that kind of stuff. It's all negative. And once they get them down to that lower energetic level, then they drain their energy because they can only take low vibration energy. They can't deal with, you know, the Christ energy or love energy. They can't deal with it. Anybody who sends them love, they run like a bat out of hell. They can't stand it.
After my crazy experience where I went mentally ill and came out the other side, I experienced synchronicity. I experienced all kinds of crazy things. I have the deepest faith possible today. I've had checks drop out of the sky for $20,000, like all in real life. I live a different life. I'm not even the same human being. How do you explain that? I drank from the time I was 13 years old till the time I was arrested in that video. It was 25 years in a dungeon of addiction and debauchery and self-loathing. I used to hate myself. Today, I'm my own biggest fan. I go after all my dreams. I live a productive, positive life. I'm known for being a positive person today. My last name in Gaelic, Durkin, it literally means pessimist when you look it up. I'm the most positive person around today. I try to be that. And I really genuinely mean it. Something happened to me spiritually when I was in that realm that has left me a completely different person. I'm happier and more successful and more driven than I've ever been. And now I have a heart to help the world become a better place, and we're putting it into action. How does that happen to a child abuse victim with no therapy, no drug treatment? I went to 9 treatment centers in my life, and every one of them failed, but not this one. Not the treatment center God had for me, not the journey. So people can look at my story as crazy, but if you look at me today, the stretch between the two entities that I have become, from what I used to be to today, people can't put their finger on it, and they can't explain it, and there's no scientific explanation for that.
How long have you been sober, Patrick?
That arrest video was June 3rd, 2018, so it's over 5 years.
Congratulations.
I was an IV meth addict who's been incarcerated. I call myself Boston 2%. I have it tattooed on my body, the 2% symbol, because only 2% of us get and stay clean off meth lifetime. I don't struggle with it at all anymore. I was blessed. I had a true blue, real life miracle from God above. He touched me and I've never been the same. And now I lead people out of the fire.
See, what psychiatry and psychology don't seem to realize is that we are spiritual beings. We're not
having a
beings.
human experience.
We are spiritual beings. And in all the years I spent in college, I have never seen anything in psychology that was spiritual. I have never seen anything in psychiatry that was spiritual.
Right. And I had to
deal with it.
I had the balls to write a book that exposes the spiritual side of crystal meth. There's not many of those books out there. It's very unique, and that's why it's resonating. The #1 comment on my TikTok videos is, "Oh my God, I can't believe somebody's speaking about this, because every time I try to, people call me crazy." And now we have this community of crazy people that are all healing and getting better, and everybody's getting clean, and they're getting their life and their kids and their careers back. I mean, it's a spiritual realm for sure. And God's doing real miracles.
Now, what would you say, what was your opinion of psychiatry while you were undergoing all this?
Well, I mean, I really personally can't have an opinion on actual psychiatry because I got no psychiatric treatment. I was drugged. I was incarcerated. And that, I mean, I can tell you that was terrible, but I never had therapy, not once. I never sat down with a doctor one time to talk about my feelings or how I was doing or anything. That's it. I don't even know what psychiatry is. I mean, what happens in a state hospital isn't real psychiatry. My grandfather was a child psychiatrist. I know what a real psychiatrist does. And that's not there, 100%. So I think the state hospital system is run by the pharmaceutical mafia. I think it's all a big sham. I think it's a big scam. I think that they take patients that were used to be inmates and they start making $200 a day in county jail, and now it's probably up to $1,500 a day per patient in the state hospital now with inflation.
Yeah, now what
so it's a business.
They closed down state hospitals all over the country,
right?
And they dumped all those people on the streets, and they couldn't survive out there, so they had to steal and rob and sell drugs and what. Now they're all in prison.
Texas has
prisons
4.
Are the state hospitals, and it cost them twice as much to keep them there.
Texas has 4 operating state hospitals: San Antonio, Austin, Vernon, and somewhere else. And it's one of the lowest funded states in the country. So it's like they're still out there, but I think that they want us to make it think that they're all closed down because they have these big cash cows sitting in the middle of fields. I mean, I added the numbers up. There was 6 units, 40 people per unit, $1,000, $1,100 a day. Do the math. That's millions. Never mind the medication. That's not even in play yet. You're talking millions and millions of dollars. They don't want to let people go out of those places. It was a miracle. I left in 6 months. I was the fastest patient to ever leave San Antonio State Hospital on a felony 1 charge. They never let you go that quick. They had to let me go because God told them. He made it so impossible.
The cost of those medications are outrageous too. It costs for a psychotic to stay even half sane on those meds is somewhere around $800 a month just for the meds.
Go to Mexico.
The psychiatry. Yeah, go to Mexico and you can get them for $75. The same medicines made by the same companies, and there you can buy them over the counter. Here.
Why aren't we researching plant-based medicines like cannabis and psilocybin that are like psilocybin? They're saying is like lighting up the human brain and healing it in small doses, where it's like you can see it reconnecting. Why aren't we studying that? Why isn't that being used in modern medicine? I mean, it's because they want to manufacture pills, inflate the prices, blow it out of proportion, and they want to make trillions of dollars doing it. And they don't want people to get better.
I think you're absolutely right. They do not want people to get better. It's the almighty buck that does that. That's why they're suppressing something like the Mace Energy method that actually works. They don't want something that works. They want to sell drugs and make money.
It's like
I think that cannabis can be just as harmful, though. I've known people that that smoke some weed and they'll go immediately into a psychosis, and they'll become super paranoid and think that people are after them and that the government's watching them and that they got their phones tapped and all that. So I'm not an advocate for cannabis or any of that either, because I think that it can be just as dangerous and just as harmful. Now, psilocybin in a like a microdose can have beneficial effects, but just like with cannabis and methamphetamine, in a large dose, it can also take you into a psychosis as well. And you can get all of that same type of things that you've been through, Patrick, with a high dose of psilocybin mushrooms. Or
and I don't think that people should take high doses of anything. I think if it was studied under, if we took all the money that they were pouring into the pills and refine natural medicines that come from the earth, there's probably a possibility that they could make it safe, make it effective, and it'd be a heck of a lot more effective than what there's out there now, for sure. Have you ever taken Seroquel before? I have. Seroquel made me feel like I was going through chemotherapy. It burns your pancreas. I mean, these are the side effects. Number one.
Yeah, it's an antipsychotic drug.
Yeah, I mean, I felt poisoned. I felt 100% poisoned. I felt weak, deteriorated. My skin started turning gray. My eyes were bloodshot. I felt like I had taken chemotherapy for cancer. That's not something that should be on the market.
Well, see, these drugs they're not abusable drugs. Nobody in their right mind wants to take them, and even people in their wrong mind don't want to take them. Yet the psychiatrists are holding on to them like they're gold, because to them they are gold. I mean, in Mexico, you can go and buy them over the counter at the drugstore. You can go to the psychiatrist. He goes, I think this will help you. You go to the drugstore, buy it over the counter. You don't have to go back to that psychiatrist. Here in the United States, you got to go every month. You got to keep going back to that psychiatrist to get your prescriptions refilled.
Look, my dad was an accountant at a children's hospital in real life. And he told me that he was seeing bills for $800 for a bag of saline, $400 for a box of Band-Aids. What is going on in the United States? We need a complete overhaul of medical reform. Absolutely. Like,
I agree.
It's trillions of dollars in waste, and it's lining the pockets of the most evil people on the planet that would do this to the American people and people all over the world. It's crazy.
When you look at the number of people that are on psychiatric drugs right now, it's horrendous. I mean, they're not fostering normal, healthy care. I mean, it's like, oh, come to us and get a drug and cure all your problems. And that the psychiatric offices are full. They're booked months and months ahead of time. People are not dealing with their problems. They're relying on drugs, and the psychiatric mafia is drugging them up. The major portions of the population are being drugged now by these psychiatric drugs.
They came up with the sibling rivalry one, Jerry. The one that's a diagnosis where when siblings don't like each other, they don't get along, they got a pill for it now. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, listen to this crap. DSM-5, this is their dictionary of mental illnesses. It says DSM-5 labels almost all human emotion as mental illness. A child who talks back, a man who spends too much time on the internet, a woman who grieves the death of her husband or child for more than 2 weeks are all labeled as mentally ill and told they need to be drugged. Unhappiness is labeled as depression, and people are encouraged to numb themselves with drugs instead of dealing with the life situations that are causing their unhappiness. Over 2/3 of psychiatrists who wrote the DSM-5 have financial ties to the drug industry. Virtually anyone who visits a psychiatrist for any reason will be labeled with some mental illness and based on this subjective manual. If you were to put 10 psychiatrists in the room, give them a complex psychiatric diagnosis, chances are they'd come up with 10 different diagnoses. Now, here's an example of some of the diagnoses they dreamed up. Mathematics disorder, people who aren't good at math. Caffeine intoxication, somebody who drinks too many cups of coffee a day.
Man, I'm sick. I'm a coffee drinking math idiot.
You got a caffeine intoxication disorder.
Yeah, and I'm bad at math, Jerry. I need 2 pills.
Got two of them. Well, they got some
drug test, Patrick, for freaking drugs, and it'll come up with caffeine and nicotine, probably.
Right. You come out of their office with some kind of drug. Sibling relational disorder. These are kids who are fighting with each other. Sexual orientation disturbance, homosexuality. Here's a Florence syndrome, being overwhelmed by beauty, such as Florence, Italy. Fainting and dizziness are the symptoms. The treatment are antidepressant drugs. Paris syndrome mostly happens to Japanese visiting France. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, feelings of persecution, which before the DSM would have been labeled as cultural shock. I mean, all of these mental illnesses are completely made up. There's not a single objective test for any of them. None of them. There's no lab work. There's no EEG. There's no EKG. There's no test. These are all subjective, made-up illnesses.
So the scientists can't provide the science. There's no baseline.
There is no science. There is no baseline. They just make these things up. They take segments of human behavior and pathologize them, put them in this Bible of theirs that looks very formal. I mean, it's, all these numbers and subcategories and and they use that as the Bible in the PhD psychology programs and in friggin' the psychiatry programs. This is their Bible. They study these things. It's like they memorize these made up things so they can go out and diagnose. And the main reason is they need some kind of diagnosis for the insurance companies. If they don't have some formal diagnosis that's agreed upon by psychiatry, insurance won't pay. It's all money, 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 money. Nobody's getting better.
Well, we need change, and I think it's coming. I wrote Fire and Ice, the Meth Bible, honestly, when I was writing it. I wrote it for the big screen. And I think it's unique enough where it has a shot. And if that ever happens, we're going to go down to San Antonio State Hospital with some news crews and go see Dr. No Good and see if he wants to have a sit-down meeting with me. I'd love to run into him again. Maybe I can laugh at him this time.
Yeah, you won't get past the front door.
Nope. I'll have to go in and visit one of my old friends. That's it.
Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time this evening. Very fascinating discussion. And I think a lot of this is due to drugs are responsible for a lot of this. And it used to be just plain old trauma. And now you got drugs mixed in with trauma, which is never a good mixture. Patrick, can you tell people where they can purchase your book, or if you have a website or anything that you would like to plug?
You can search The Meth Bible on Amazon. Just search The Meth Bible on Amazon. The audio version has dropped and it's free right now. So you can download the audio version free through Audible, through Amazon. The Kindle version is free if you have Amazon Prime, and it's also available in paperback. And it's an exciting read, but reader beware. It's the most raw book about meth addiction you will find anywhere.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Appreciate your time this evening. The links to Patrick's information will be in the description of this video. Highly recommend purchasing his book and checking out his TikTok page as well. Stay with me, Patrick. I'm going to kick you off. Jerry, my friend, thanks so much for coming on. Can you let people know where they can find you online, your website, or where they can purchase your amazing book?
Yeah, they can purchase An Amazing Journey Through the Psychotic Mind from lulu.com, the publisher, or Amazon. Now, that book will tell you about how we came to the conclusion that these voices that the schizophrenics hear are not hallucinations, but are actually entities. Okay. The other thing is, I think that this, for the most part, psychiatric mafia should be replaced by the MACE energy method. It shows almost immediate results within 3 or 4 sessions. Most normal psychological problems, average psychological problems, are cured. They're gone, And you can find a practitioner at www.maceenergymethod.com/about/. Okay, and it will be a lot cheaper than going to a psychiatrist. I mean, this is a cutting-edge energetic therapy. It's the only one I've ever seen that actually works. None of that stuff that I learned in undergraduate, graduate school, or in the PhD program can even hold a candle's light to this stuff. I mean, this stuff works. You know, if you're thinking about drugging yourself with psychiatric meds, try the Mace Energy method first.
Thanks so much, Jerry. Really appreciate your time this evening. The links to Jerry's website is in the description of this video. Highly recommend it. Stay with me, Jerry. And a big thank you to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithms. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And a big shout out to Matthew for the $50 super chat. Thanks so much, Matthew, for your kindness and generosity and support of the show. Really appreciate you guys. Everyone else in the chat, good to see you. Jeanette, Anna, Michael, We Free, Wu Gai Fu. How's it going, Wu Gai Fu? No Bull Truth. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for being a member. You can sign up to be a member and become a Writer Ranger member and support the show monthly. And also check out my documentary on Amazon Prime, JFKX, Solving the Crime of the Century, also for free on Tubi. And you can watch it internationally on Vimeo. All the links are in the description. All right, guys. Hope you all have a safe and wonderful weekend. We'll see you guys next time.